A blaze of gunfire shattered the evening calm of Red Cloud, Nebraska in the autumn of 1875. But Clara Harrington didn't flinch as bullets whizzed past her head, striking the saloon wall behind her. Not because she was brave, but because no one was aiming at her. No one ever did. In a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, Clara might as well have been a ghost. Clara clutched her worn leather-bound journal to her chest and continued walking down the muddy main street, passing through the crowd gathering to witness the commotion. No one moved to make way for her. She simply had to navigate around them like fence posts in a field. The shootout between two drunken cattle drivers continued, but Clara had pressing matters herbs to collect before sunset for Mrs. Whittaker's cough remedy. At 22, Clara had lived in Red Cloud her entire life, working as the town's unofficial healer since her grandmother passed 3 years prior. She'd inherited not only her grandmother's knowledge of medicine, but also her small cabin at the edge of town, nestled between civilization and wilderness, fitting for someone who existed in a similar in-between state. As she reached the edge of town, a voice called out, "Hey, you there." Clara kept walking, assuming the call wasn't meant for her. No one ever called out to her, "Miss." In the blue dress, Clara stopped. Her dress was indeed blue, faded from countless washings, but still her favorite. She turned slowly, surprised to see a man she'd never encountered before, mounted on a chestnut stallion. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of the Republican River after rainfall, he watched her with undisguised interest. "Are you addressing me, sir?" Her voice came out rough from disuse. The stranger dismounted with fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. His clothes were trail-worn but of good quality dark trousers, a faded red shirt, and a leather vest. The six-shooter at his hip gleamed with care despite the dust of travel covering everything else. "Yes, madam. You're the first person who hasn't looked at me like I'm bringing the plague to town." He approached, removing his hat to reveal dark hair streaked with hints of copper. "Forgive my manners. Francis O'Malley at your service." Clara tilted her head, studying him. "You must be mistaken. No one sees me." His smile revealed a small dimple in his right cheek. "I see you just fine. Better than fine, actually." Clara's heart fluttered traitorously. "Clara Harrington," she offered, then added with practiced resignation, "I'm invisible to everyone." The cowboy's smile deepened as he replied, "You're all I've ever seen since I rode into this town." For the first time in years, Clara felt a blush warming her cheeks. "You're new to Red Cloud." "Passing through," Francis confirmed. "Heading to Wyoming territory with a cattle drive, but we're stopping here to resupply." He gestured toward the saloon where the shooting had now ceased. "My associates are making themselves known in more traditional ways." The men shooting at each other. "Some of them," he acknowledged with a grimace. "Not my preferred method of introduction." Clara found herself smiling despite her usual reserve. "And what is your preferred method, Mr. O'Malley?" "Civil conversation with a beautiful woman whenever possible." His gaze remained steady on hers as if memorizing her features. "Beautiful," Clara echoed, the word foreign on her tongue. "Very much so," he said simply, without flourish or excessive flattery, which somehow made it more believable. Clara shifted uncomfortably, unused to such attention. "I must gather herbs before sunset. Good day, Mr. O'Malley." She turned to go, but his voice stopped her again. "Herbs? Are you a healer?" Clara paused. "I know some remedies." "Mind if I accompany you? I've got a man with a nasty cough that's keeping the whole camp awake." Clara hesitated. No one had ever asked to accompany her before. "I suppose that would be acceptable." Francis tied his horse to a nearby hitching post and fell into step beside her. Clara led him toward the prairie beyond town, where late-blooming wildflowers and medicinal plants still thrive despite the approaching winter. "You said you're invisible," Frances remarked as they walked. "What did you mean by that?" Clara kept her eyes on the path ahead. "Exactly what I said. People look through me. They come when they need medicine, then forget I exist until the next time they are ill." "That's hard to believe," Frances said. "You're not exactly easy to overlook." Clara gave a humorless laugh. "I've lived here my entire life, Mr. O'Malley. I know how things stand." "Call me Frances, please." He stopped walking, causing Clara to pause as well. "And I think a town can get so used to having a treasure that they forget to appreciate it." Clara didn't know how to respond to such words. No one had spoken to her this way before. "There," she said instead, pointing to a patch of wild thyme. "That will help with your man's cough. I'll show you how to prepare it." As Clara knelt to harvest the herb, Frances crouched beside her. "You have gentle hands," he observed, "like my mother's. She was a healer too back in Missouri." "Was?" Clara asked before she could stop herself. "Cholera 6 years ago," Frances said quietly. "She could save everyone but herself, it seemed." "I'm sorry," Clara replied, recognizing the familiar pain of loss in his voice. "I carry her knowledge with me," Frances said, "though I suspect yours is far greater." Clara carefully placed the thyme in her gathering basket. "My grandmother taught me everything she knew: plants, poultices, tonics. Some folks call it witchcraft, but it's just knowledge passed down." "My mother would say the same," Frances agreed, "though she added prayer to her remedies." "As do I," Clara admitted, surprised at how easy conversation flowed between them. They spent the next hour gathering herbs, thyme for coughs, yarrow for fever, willow bark for pain. Frances proved knowledgeable about many plants, occasionally identifying uses Clara hadn't known. As the sun began to set, painting the Nebraska sky in fiery orange and deep purple, Frances helped Clara to her feet after she harvested the last of the yarrow. "Thank you for your help," Clara said, suddenly shy again as they stood close. "For your man with the cough, brew the thyme with honey if you have it. Let it steep for 10 minutes, no more." Frances nodded but made no move to leave. "How long will you be invisible after I go, Clara Harrington?" The question caught her off guard. I don't understand. If I ride out tomorrow with my cattle drive, will you fade away again? Return to being unseen?" Clara clutched her basket tighter. "That's how it's always been." Francis shook his head. "It doesn't have to be." "You don't know this town, Mr. O'Malley. You don't know me. I'd like to." His voice dropped lower. "If you'd permit it." Clara took a step back, her heart racing. "You're passing through by your own admission." "Plans can change," Francis said simply. "Not for someone like me," Clara replied, the bitterness of years coloring her words. "Good evening, Mr. O'Malley. I hope your man feels better." She turned and walked swiftly back toward town, ignoring his call behind her. That night, as Clara steeped herbs for Mrs. Whittaker's remedy, she couldn't shake the memory of Francis O'Malley's eyes, focused entirely on her as if she were the only person in Red Cloud. It was disconcerting, intriguing, and completely temporary. Morning came with a knock at her door, unprecedented in itself. As most townspeople left their requests for medicine in a basket on her porch, avoiding direct interaction, Clara opened the door to find Francis standing there, hat in hand, a small bundle wrapped in cloth tucked under his arm. "Mr. O'Malley," she greeted, hiding her surprise. "Is your man's cough no better?" "Much improved, thanks to your thyme remedy," Francis replied. "I've brought something in exchange." He extended the bundle. Clara accepted it cautiously, unwrapping the cloth to find fresh baked bread and a jar of honey. "This is too generous for a handful of thyme." "Not just for the thyme," Francis said. "For your time as well." Clara felt that unfamiliar blush return. "Would you like to come in for tea?" I've just brewed some." Francis smiled, that small dimple appearing again. "I'd be honored." Clara's cabin was small but meticulously organized, with dried herbs hanging from ceiling beams and shelves lined with labeled jars of medicines and tinctures. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a small bedroom curtained off in the back. "You live here alone?" Francis asked, taking the offered seat at her small table. "Since my grandmother passed," Clara confirmed, pouring tea into 2 chipped cups. "She raised me after my parents died in a fever epidemic when I was 5. "That couldn't have been easy," Francis remarked, watching as Clara added a spoonful of his gifted honey to each cup. "It was the only life I knew," Clara said with a small shrug. "Grandmother taught me everything about healing. The townspeople respected her enough to tolerate me." "Tolerate seems a poor word for someone who heals their ailments," Francis observed. Accepting the tea, Clara smiled sadly. "Healers are necessary but not always welcome at social gatherings. Especially when they know too many secrets, who's drinking too much, whose husband beats her, which respectable gentleman visits the working girls at Madame Rose's." Francis nodded thoughtfully. "Knowledge is power, but it can also be isolation." "Precisely." Clara sipped her tea, studying him over the rim of her cup. "Your cattle drive leaves today." Francis set down his cup. "About that, there's been a change of plans." Clara's heart skipped traitorously. "Oh, the drive is continuing, but I've decided to stay in Red Cloud for a time." "Why would you do that?" Clara asked, though she feared she knew the answer and feared even more that she might be wrong. Francis met her gaze directly. "Because I've never encountered someone who claims to be invisible yet shines so brightly I can hardly look away." Clara set her cup down with a clatter. "Mr. O'Malley, Francis," he corrected gently. "Francis," she conceded, "you don't know me." "I'd like the chance to," he repeated from the previous day. "I've taken a job at the livery stable. Temporary, but it will keep me in town for at least a month." Clara didn't know whether to be thrilled or terrified. "People will talk if you spend time with me." "Let them," Francis said with an easy shrug. "I've never much cared for others' opinions of my choices." "That's easy to say when you're passing through a town," Clara countered. "Harder when you're trying to establish yourself." Francis leaned forward. "Clara, I've spent the last 6 years moving from place to place, never staying long enough to put down roots. For the first time since my mother died, I've met someone who makes me want to stay still." "After one conversation about herbs?" Clara asked incredulously. Francis smiled. "Sometimes you just know." Clara wanted to believe him, but years of disappointment had taught her caution. "A month, you said, to start," Francis confirmed. Clara took a deep breath. "There's a harvest festival in 2 weeks, if you're serious about. Whatever this is, you can escort me there." Francis's smile widened. "I'd be honored." "Don't accept so quickly," Clara warned. "No one has invited me to a social function in years. Your reputation will suffer by association." "Then it will suffer," Francis said simply. 2 weeks from now, I'll come calling with my best hat shined and my boots polished." After Francis left for his first day at the livery stable, Clara tried to return to her normal routine, organizing herbs, preparing remedies, tending her small garden. But her mind kept returning to the strange cowboy who saw her when no one else did. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of unexpected moments. Francis brought her wildflowers he'd spotted while exercising the livery horses. He appeared at her door with interesting books borrowed from the schoolteacher. Once, he brought her to the telegraph office to introduce her to the new operator, a friendly man named Henry, who had recently arrived from Chicago and thus had no preconceptions about Clara. Each day, Clara waited for Francis to realize his mistake, to see that associating with her would only bring him the same isolation she experienced. Each day, he proved her wrong by returning, his smile as warm as ever. The townsfolk noticed. Clara heard the whispers when she went to the general store. She saw the disapproving looks when Francis tipped his hat to her in public. But for the first time, the judgment didn't sting as badly because someone was finally seeing her. The night of the harvest festival arrived clear and cool. Clara stood before her small mirror, smoothing the skirt of her best dress, a deep green that had once belonged to her grandmother but had been altered to fit her smaller frame. She'd spent hours the night before removing stains and mending small tears, wanting desperately to look presentable. A knock at the door sent her heart racing. Francis stood on her porch, looking more handsome than any man had a right to, his usually unruly hair tamed, his white shirt crisp under a black vest, and yes, his boots polished to a shine. "Miss Harrington," he greeted with an exaggerated bow. "You look absolutely stunning." Clara fought the urge to fidget with her simple braided-up dough. "You clean up well yourself, Mr. O'Malley," he offered his arm. "Shall we scandalize the good people of Red Cloud?" Despite her nerves, Clara laughed. "I believe we already have." The harvest festival was held in the town square, with tables laden with food, a small band playing lively tunes, and lanterns strung between trees casting a warm glow over everything. As Francis escorted Clara into the festivities, conversations momentarily paused, heads turned, and whispers began. "Ignore them," Francis murmured, his hand warm against the small of her back. "They'll find something new to gossip about soon enough." Clara nodded, though her throat felt tight with anxiety. Francis guided her to the food tables first, filling a plate with delicacies she wouldn't normally allow herself: Mrs. Peterson's famous apple pie, Mr. Miller's smoked ham, Mrs. Johnson's sweet potato casserole. They found seats at the edge of the gathering, and for a while they simply ate and observed. The band played a lively reel, and several couples took to the cleared area that served as a dance floor. "Would you care to dance?" Francis asked when they'd finished eating. Clara shook her head quickly. "I don't know how. Grandmother never taught me and no one ever asked." Instead of pity, Francis's expression showed only determination. "Then I'll teach you. Not here, not now, but someday soon. You dance, Mr. O'Malley?" Clara asked, attempting to lighten the moment. "My mother insisted all her children learn," Francis explained. "She said it was as important as knowing how to ride or shoot, a necessary social skill." "You have siblings?" Clara realized how little she knew about his past. "Two sisters, both married and living in Missouri," Francis said, "and a younger brother who took to the sea instead of the land. I haven't seen him in 3 years." "You must miss them," Clara said softly. Francis nodded. "Every day. But I write when I can, and they write back when my letters find them." Before Clara could respond, a shadow fell across their table. She looked up to see Sheriff Thomas Blackburn, the town's law enforcement for as long as she could remember, and one of her most consistent detractors. "Evening, Miss Harrington," he said, his tone falsely polite. "Surprising to see you at a social gathering." Clara stiffened. "Good evening, Sheriff." The sheriff turned his attention to Francis. "O'Malley, isn't it? Working at Jensen's livery." Francis stood, offering his hand. "That's right. Francis O'Malley." The sheriff ignored the offered hand. "Word is you've been spending considerable time with our local herbalist." The slight hesitation made Clara wince. She knew what the sheriff had almost said instead, which, hedge doctor, spinster. Francis's expression remained pleasant, but Clara noticed his jaw tightening. "Miss Harrington has been kind enough to share her knowledge of local medicinal plants with me." "Is that what they're calling it these days?" the sheriff asked with a smirk. Francis stepped closer to the lawman, his voice dropping. "I'd advise you to watch your implications about the lady, Sheriff." The sheriff's hand drifted toward his gun. "Is that a threat, Cowboy?" "Merely a suggestion between gentlemen," Francis replied evenly. "Though I only see one gentleman present in this conversation." The tension between the men was palpable. Clara stood quickly, placing a restraining hand on Francis's arm. "It's getting late. I should return home." Francis didn't take his eyes off the sheriff. "I'll escort you." The sheriff snorted. "Running away, as usual, Miss Harrington. Some things never change." Francis moved so quickly Clara barely saw it happen. One moment he was beside her, the next he had the sheriff by his shirt collar, their faces inches apart. "Apologize to the lady," Francis demanded, his voice deadly quiet. The sheriff's face reddened with anger and embarrassment as several festival-goers turned to watch the confrontation. "Unhand me, Drifter, or I'll have you in a cell before midnight." "Francis, please," Clara pleaded. "It's not worth it." Francis released the sheriff but didn't step back. "Miss Harrington deserves your respect, Sheriff. She heals this town's sick, tends to your wounded, and asks for little in return. If you can't see her value, the failing is yours, not hers." The sheriff straightened his rumpled shirt. "You've made an enemy tonight, O'Malley." "I've made worse," Francis replied calmly. He turned to Clara, offering his arm again. "Shall we?" Clara took his arm, her legs trembling slightly as they walked away from the festival, the music and laughter fading behind them. Once they were out of earshot, she stopped walking. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, though her heart raced at the memory of someone finally standing up for her. "Sheriff Blackburn can make life very difficult for you." "He was disrespecting you," Francis said, as if that explained everything. "I'm used to it. You shouldn't have to be." Francis's voice held such conviction that Clara found herself believing him, if only for a moment. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. "Why risk your position in town, antagonize the sheriff, subject yourself to gossip, all for someone you barely know?" Francis took both her hands in his. "Because from the moment I saw you walking alone while bullets flew around you, completely unnoticed by everyone else, I knew you were extraordinary. And I've spent every day since then confirming that first impression." Clara wanted desperately to believe him, but years of disappointment made it difficult. "People leave, Francis, or they stay and gradually stop seeing me just like everyone else does." "Test me," Francis challenged. "Give me time to prove I'm different." The moonlight illuminated his earnest expression, and Clara found herself nodding. "Time," she agreed, "but I won't hold you to anything. If you change your mind, I won't," Francis interrupted. "Then there are no hard feelings," Clara finished firmly. Francis walked her the rest of the way home in companionable silence. At her door, he took her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Good night, Clara Harrington. I'll see you tomorrow." "Tomorrow," she echoed, watching as he walked back toward town, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the darkness. True to his word, Francis appeared the next day and the day after, and each day that followed. Despite the sheriff's obvious dislike, despite the townspeople's whispers, despite Clara's own insecurities, Francis remained steadfast in his attention. October turned to November, and the temporary job at the livery stable became more permanent as the owner, Mr. Jensen, took a liking to Francis's way with horses and his meticulous care of the equipment. "He's offered me a partnership," Francis told Clara one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the sunset. "If I stay through winter and spring, and if business remains good, he'll sell me a quarter share of the stable." Clara's heart leaped at the prospect of Francis staying, then immediately constricted with worry. "The winter here can be brutal. You might regret not continuing south." Frances reached for her hand, a gesture that had become familiar over the weeks. "The only thing I'd regret is leaving." The first snow came early that year, blanketing Red Cloud in white just before Thanksgiving. Clara awoke to find Francis clearing a path from the road to her cabin door, his breath fogging in the cold air. "What are you doing?" she called, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders as she stepped onto the porch. Francis looked up, his cheeks ruddy from exertion and cold. "Making sure you can get out and folks who need you can get in." He leaned on the shovel. "Besides, I wanted to ask if you'd join me for Thanksgiving dinner. Mr. and Mrs. Jensen have invited us both." "Both of us?" Clara asked, surprised. The Jensens had always been cordial to her when they needed medicine but had never extended a social invitation before. "Both of us," Francis confirmed with a grin. "Mrs. Jensen says any woman who can put up with me deserves a good meal and some company." Clara laughed, the sound bright in the crisp air. "In that case, I accept." Thanksgiving with the Jensens proved to be the first of many unexpected social invitations that winter. As the townsfolk observed Francis's unwavering attention to Clara, their curiosity gradually overcame their long-held prejudices. Mrs. Peterson invited Clara to a quilting circle. Mr. Wilson, the saloon owner, nodded respectfully when she passed instead of looking through her. Even the new schoolteacher, Miss Franklin, sought Clara's advice on local medicinal plants for her science lessons. "You've changed things," Clara told Francis as they walked through town one December afternoon, arms linked against the cold. "People actually see me now." Francis squeezed her hand. "They always should have. I just reminded them to look." Christmas approached, bringing with it more snow and frigid temperatures. Clara found herself busier than ever as winter ailments spread through town. Francis helped where he could, delivering remedies when the snow was too deep for Clara to navigate easily, learning which herbs treated which conditions, even building additional shelves in her cabin to accommodate her expanding medicine stores. On Christmas Eve, Francis arrived at Clara's cabin with a small pine tree, which he insisted on setting up in the corner of her main room. "We never had a tree," Clara protested weakly, even as she helped him secure it in a bucket of sand. "Grandmother said it was frivolous." "Christmas should have at least a little frivolity," Francis argued, producing a small bag of ornaments, pine cones dipped in wax, paper stars, and a few glass baubles that must have cost him dearly. "Besides, the scent alone is worth the effort." They decorated the tree together, and when it was done, Clara had to admit the effect was charming. The small tree transformed her practical cabin into something festive and warm. "I have something for you," Francis said, pulling a small package from his coat pocket. "I know gift-giving is tomorrow, but I couldn't wait." Clara accepted the package with trembling hands. "I have something for you, too." She retrieved a wrapped bundle from her bedroom. They sat before the fireplace, suddenly shy despite the months of growing closeness. Francis gestured for Clara to open her gift first. She unwrapped it carefully to find a small wooden box exquisitely carved with wildflowers. Opening the lid revealed a delicate silver locket. "Francis," she breathed. "It's beautiful." "Open it," he urged. Inside was a tiny pressed flower, a prairie rose, the first wildflower he had ever brought her. On the opposite side was a small inscription, "Always seen." Tears filled Clara's eyes. "I don't know what to say." Francis gently took the locket and fastened it around her neck. "You don't need to say anything." Clara wiped her eyes and handed Francis her gift. He unwrapped it to find a hand-bound leather journal and a new fountain pen. "You mentioned you write to your family," Clara explained. "I thought you might need a proper journal for your thoughts as well." Francis ran his fingers over the soft leather. "It's perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Did you make this?" Clara nodded. "Grandmother taught me bookbinding along with medicine. The leather is from Mr. Peterson's tannery, and I press the pages myself." Francis leaned forward and, for the first time, pressed his lips to hers in a gentle kiss. Clara froze momentarily, then melted into the gesture, her heart racing with joy and disbelief. When they parted, Francis rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Clara Harrington." Clara closed her eyes, savoring the words she'd never expected to hear. "I think I fell the moment you said you could see me." The rest of winter passed in a blur of snowstorms and cozy evenings, of Clara teaching Francis more about medicine, and Francis teaching Clara to dance in her small cabin. By February, even Sheriff Blackburn had grudgingly accepted Francis's presence in town, especially after Francis helped organize a search party when 2 children went missing during a blizzard. They were found safely huddled in a rancher's outbuilding, cold but unharmed. As March brought the first hints of spring, Mr. Jensen made good on his offer, selling Francis a quarter share in the livery stable. The business had thrived under Francis's care, attracting customers from neighboring settlements who appreciated his fair prices and excellent work with difficult horses. Clara, too, found her practice expanding. Word of her healing skills spread beyond Red Cloud, bringing patients from as far as 20 miles away. With Francis's encouragement, she began keeping more detailed records of her treatments and results, creating a systematic approach to her inherited knowledge. One evening in early April, as they walked along the newly thawed river, Francis suddenly stopped and turned to Clara. "I've been thinking," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "A dangerous pastime," Clara teased, though her heart skipped at his serious expression. Francis smiled briefly, then took both her hands in his. "I came to Red Cloud with no intention of staying. I was just another drifter passing through like dozens before me." "And now," Clara prompted when he paused. "And now I can't imagine being anywhere else," Francis said. "Because of you." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, which he held tightly in his fist. "Clara Harrington, when I first met you, you told me you were invisible. I've spent months trying to show you how completely, brilliantly visible you are to me, and now to everyone who takes the time to truly see you." Clara's breath caught as Francis dropped to one knee, opening his hand to reveal a simple gold ring with a small pearl. "I want to spend the rest of my life seeing you if you'll let me," Francis continued, his voice strong despite the emotion in his eyes. "Will you marry me?" Clara felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she managed. "Yes, I will." Francis slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and gathered her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally parted, Clara looked down at the pearl gleaming on her finger. "It was my mother's," Francis explained. "I wrote to my oldest sister months ago, asking her to send it. It arrived yesterday." "It's perfect," Clara whispered, overwhelmed by the thought that he had been planning this for so long. They were married in May when the prairie bloomed with wildflowers. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, held in the small church Clara had rarely entered before meeting Francis. Mrs. Jensen helped Clara sew a new dress of pale blue silk, while Mr. Peterson crafted a pair of fine boots as a wedding gift for Francis. Even Sheriff Blackburn offered his congratulations, albeit gruffly, presenting them with a hand-carved wooden box for Clara's medicinal supplies. "My wife swears by your remedies," he admitted. "Says you saved her from pneumonia last winter." The Reverend Williams, who had once been among those who whispered about Clara's unnatural knowledge, now beamed as he pronounced them husband and wife. As Francis kissed his bride, cheers erupted from the assembled townsfolk, people who had once looked through Clara as if she weren't there. After the ceremony, as they greeted well-wishers at the reception held in the town hall, Clara leaned close to Frances and whispered, "I never thought I'd have this. Any of this." Frances squeezed her hand. "You deserve all of it and more." They moved into Clara's cabin initially, but by summer, they had begun construction on a larger house nearby. Frances insisted that Clara have a dedicated space for her medical practice, with proper shelving for her herbs and remedies, and a consultation room where patients could be received in comfort. Clara continued to expand her healing knowledge, corresponding with doctors in Omaha, and even taking a 2-week trip with Frances to study with a renowned herbalist in St. Louis. Frances's business at the livery stable flourished, and by the fall, Mr. Jensen had sold him another quarter share, making them equal partners. 1 year after they met, Clara and Frances stood on the porch of their new home, watching another harvest festival in the distance. Unlike the previous year, they had helped organize this one, with Clara coordinating the food and Frances arranging for additional musicians from a neighboring town. "We should join them soon," Frances said, his arm around Clara's waist. "They'll wonder where the guests of honor are." Clara leaned into his embrace. "In a moment. I just wanted to remember where we were a year ago, how different everything was." Frances pressed a kiss to her temple. "Are you happy, Mrs. O'Malley?" Clara turned in his arms to face him. "Happier than I ever imagined possible." She took a deep breath. "And I have news that I think will make you happy as well." Frances raised an eyebrow. "Oh," Clara took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "In about 7 months there will be 3 of us." Frances's expression transformed from confusion to wonder to joy in the span of seconds. "A baby! We're having a baby!" Clara nodded, laughing as Frances lifted her off her feet and spun her around. "Careful," she protested. "I've been feeling rather delicate in the mornings." Frances set her down immediately, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Are you well? Do you need to rest? Should we skip the festival?" "I'm perfectly fine," Clara assured him. "Dr. Matthews confirmed it yesterday. Everything is progressing normally." Frances pressed his forehead to hers. "A father, I'm going to be a father." He pulled back suddenly, eyes wide. "I need to write to my sisters, and my brother if I can find which port he's in this month." Clara laughed again, taking his hand. "There's time for that. For now, let's go to the festival. I want to dance with my husband before I grow too large for him to hold properly." As they walked toward the town square, greeting neighbors who now called Clara by name, waving to children who brought her wildflowers and interesting stones, nodding to men who tipped their hats respectfully, Clara felt a sense of belonging she had never known before. "You've given me so much," she told Frances as they approached the festivities. "A home, a family, a place in this community." Frances shook his head. "You always had those things, Clara. You just needed someone to remind everyone, including yourself, that you were there all along, waiting to be seen." Clara fingered the locket she still wore daily. "I'm not invisible anymore." Frances's smile was as warm as it had been the day they met. "You never were to me." The baby arrived in late April, a healthy boy they named James Thomas O'Malley, after both their fathers. Clara recovered quickly, and by summer, she was seeing patients again, often with little James sleeping peacefully in a basket nearby. Frances proved to be an attentive father, proudly carrying his son around town and bringing him to the livery stable as soon as Clara deemed him old enough, introducing the infant to the gentle horses and telling him stories about the places he'd seen in his traveling days. As James grew, so did the O'Malley's place in Red Cloud. Frances eventually bought out Mr. Jensen entirely when the older man decided to retire to live with his daughter in Omaha. Clara's medical practice became so well established that she took on an apprentice, a quiet girl named Lizzie from the edge of town, who showed an aptitude for healing and a keen interest in Clara's knowledge. 2 years after James was born, Clara gave birth to twin girls, Catherine and Elizabeth, completing their family. The O'Malley home became known as one of the warmest and most welcoming in Red Cloud, hosting gatherings for holidays and sometimes simply because Clara enjoyed having people fill the rooms with laughter and conversation. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Frances surprised Clara with a special gift, a new sign for her medical practice, beautifully painted and prominently displayed in town. Clara O'Malley, healer and midwife, seen and respected by all. Clara traced the lettering with tears in her eyes. "It's perfect," she whispered. Francis wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Not as perfect as you." Clara turned in his embrace. "Do you remember what I said when we first met, that I was invisible?" Francis nodded. "And I told you that you were all I'd ever seen." "I think about that moment often," Clara admitted. "How different my life would be if you hadn't spoken to me that day." "I couldn't have done anything else," Francis said simply. "You were the brightest thing in that dusty town." That night, after the children were asleep, Clara and Francis sat on their porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the vast Nebraska sky. Clara's head rested on Francis's shoulder, their hands intertwined as they had been countless times over the years. "I love you, Francis O'Malley," Clara said softly. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else would." Francis pressed a kiss to her hair. "I love you too, Clara O'Malley. Thank you for being worth seeing." As they rocked gently in the cool evening air, Clara reflected on the journey from invisibility to being truly seen. From a solitary existence on the fringes of the community to a life overflowing with love, family, and purpose. All because one man had looked past the assumptions and prejudices that had rendered her invisible to see the person she truly was. In the years that followed, Clara often told their story to her children and eventually her grandchildren, how a chance encounter changed the course of two lives forever. How love could make the invisible visible. How being truly seen by just one person could illuminate a path forward that had previously been shrouded in shadow. And though Red Cloud grew and changed around them, though faces came and went, though fashions and customs evolved with the passing decades, one thing remained constant: the love between Clara and Francis O'Malley, founded on that first moment of recognition when an invisible woman was finally seen.